Hello, my wonderful students. We are doing some practical legal research how-tos. And so the first thing that we want to get into, I'm going to jump right in. If you have questions, by the way, send me a message in web courses. I'm happy to kind of incorporate and roll those into future lessons. But for now, we're going to jump right into legal research how-tos. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is find a legal research platform. How are we doing our research? There's a possibility that you go to a firm or an office or some entity and they do book research, although that's extremely unlikely and increasingly not the case. So what you probably will end up doing is going to a legal research platform online. They're web-based, web-hosted, and there's two major ones, although there's a host of very helpful companies and systems. There's two sort of that are the most common you'll hear talked about, and that is LexisNexis or Lexis and Westlaw. They came from book research years and years ago, and the companies have moved a lot of their services online. They also do a lot of things other than legal research that I'll touch on a little bit in our review of those systems online. I'm actually going to screen share and show you me pulling these systems up the way that I am sort of recommending that you all access them, or I guess how you would have to access them. But the two major ones are Lexis and Westlaw. They function largely the same. There are some slight differences. I'll touch on those. And I'm also going to give you some materials that I think you should review and understand in order to make the most out of those platforms. And just know that when you're working, excuse me, when you're working in the profession, you can't control who your office uses, which of the legal research platforms your office uses, unless you run the office, in which case you can control it. But then sometimes money controls that decision as well. That they're not free, although there are some free alternatives. But I think it's helpful to learn both systems, and I think it's a good thing to not have a super strong preference towards one or the other. Certainly everybody has a preference, and largely I think that's based on their experience, which one they've experienced the most or they've worked with the most. But just think of it this way: if you have a really, really strong preference towards one and then you find a great job, but they use the other system, you don't want to be upset every time you're opening it. So I think it's good to keep an open mind and see the pros and cons of both. I'll give you some pros and cons to both of them, and in the process try to avoid giving any kind of preference myself. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So normally when you have a professional job, you're going to go to sort of a homepage or predetermined login page for your firm or for your office in the profession, and that'll be how you log in. But here you're going to go to actually the UCF library hosts these systems, and in so doing, we're going to go to the UCF library main website. And there's other ways to get there. There's other ways to get there faster. I would recommend, once you find the sort of hyperlink at the top that is the main login page, to save that as a tab on your browser to get you there faster. These are really powerful resources. You all have access to them, at least both of them, through the end of 2024. I think Westlaw goes away at the end of 2024 because of a tech fee something, and you'll see that when we look at it. But I would save these and make use of them, explore them, work through different either research assignments, or if they're not research assignments, at least kind of explore things. See if you can find seminal cases, Brown v. Board and these things, big, important, meaningful landmark cases. See if you can find them yourself, and then see the materials that went into those decisions and that have come out of those decisions. I'm going to show you a little bit of that just through some examples, but the research platforms, both of these are extremely powerful, and you're paying for them, truthfully, in a tech fee. So having the ability to go in or making the time to go in and use them is really important. So this is the main UCF library page you'll see here, and then these are technically research guides. So you're going to go to research guides, click on all research guides, and then down here to public affairs and law, and then to legal studies. I'm sure there's other ways to get there again, but this is the way that I've found to be I don't know, probably not most efficient, but it works. Go to legal research here, sort of in the middle of the page, and then you've got your two legal research platforms right here. These are the two main ones. Nexus Uni is what LexisNexis is called for the university version, and then Westlaw Campus is what the Westlaw version is called for universities. There are some other materials here. You'll see some legal encyclopedias, which we covered a few weeks back. You'll also see some guides on legal research, all of which I'm sure are awesome. The legal libraries are sort of the authority on how to use these systems, how to get the most out of them. Obviously, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and some ideas, but depending on which one you want to use, you click here for Nexus Uni here, and then you click there for Westlaw. So I've already got those two pages open. When you open them, they look like this. Nexus Uni is on the left, Westlaw is on the right, and you'll see here on both pages, they have a search bar. It's like Google. The difference is it doesn't necessarily work like Google. Google has billions that are put into trying to figure out what you mean when you type certain things. And these systems, while very well funded and very sort of expensive systems built out, they are not, they're not used by billions of people. So you have to be a little bit more intentional in the legal research that you do. And so the first thing you'll notice here is that they've got a preset on the right. For Nexus Uni, the preset, the standard, the default is for the previous 2 years. I don't know why that's the preset, but it is. Does not exist on the sort of commercial Lexis that we use. And then all content types. What all content types refers to is basically every category of information that they have. Here they've got it listed out as news, companies, legal, and people. Very briefly, they collate a lot of news sources, Reuters and public international news sources, AP and these different things. But also legal news sources are collated and put into here, and then you could search news sources for articles or information on certain things. Companies, you can do searches on companies, and you can also do searches on people. I don't know if this actually allows you to do that through your Nexus Uni, but we're able to do like background searches and prior litigation searches on individuals and on companies. And then legal, I would imagine, is probably all of the primary sources and secondary sources. We'll go ahead and click on that and see what comes up. There you go. So you've got cases from these different locations, legislation from these different locations, and then down here, these are secondary sources, law reviews and journals, admin materials, briefs, pleadings, and motions. Those are the materials that were filed by someone, a litigant, in order to get a decision in a case, and then admin codes and regulations, and then there's some legal news down here. So if you, for example, wanted to search a secondary source list for information on a particular topic, you might click on law reviews and journals, and you might say, I want to know about the right, let's say, unreasonable, if I can type, searches. And what you'll notice when you start typing is, one, there's a sort of a predictive text that comes up below, if it will come up again, and it is so-so, in my opinion, on both of them. This is not a knock on Lexis, but, and then you'll also notice that as you're typing, it's starting to sort of predictive text what you want and fill that in. So we'll go ahead and jump on that and see what happens. And over here on Westlaw, while we've got Lexis loading, you'll notice when you click on Westlaw, it's structured a little bit differently. It starts with all federal, which is the default. If you click on all federal, it is focused on jurisdiction, which is, do you want to look for state law or all state laws? I mean, when I say laws, cases, statutes. Do you want to look for all federal? Do you want to look by specific court? Do you want to look by a specific circuit? These are federal circuits, by the way. So this is federal on the right, and then the states on the left. I would say most people who are searching, I would say the vast majority will use their state and then included federal, related federal, or not, depending on what they're looking for. Very briefly, if I'm looking for state law, Florida state law decisions, and that means the DCAs or the Florida Supreme Court, I will frequently use include related federal. And you might say, well, why is that, Professor Gurney? Because you're searching for state law. And if you look for the federal, then you're going to get federal law. Yeah, Potentially. But the thing to know, and this is, if you don't know this, this is not your fault, but someone needs to tell you, and it's important to know. The federal courts frequently, not always, but they frequently interpret substantive state law, meaning I can sue someone, on behalf of a client. I could file a lawsuit in federal court against a defendant, usually a non-resident defendant, but that implicates Florida state law. Frequently, you will see the federal courts interpreting state law, and you might say, how is that possible? They are federal courts, and that is the state's law. It's a great question. Way beyond this, the scope of this class, because it's a little bit of a complicated question, like when they're allowed to and what laws and what law types, because there's procedural and there's substantive. Suffice to say that they can, and they do. So whether or not they can, they do. And so it is frequently helpful because federal courts, and this is why you might include related federal courts write longer opinions usually. They're more I shouldn't say that. The district courts, the trial courts of the federal system will write longer orders and opinions than the equivalent state court. Once you get up to the state appellate court or state Supreme Court, they will write large, full, robust opinions. And the reason for that is not because we're getting paid by the page over here reading stuff, but because if you go and find an order and it just says denied, that's not super helpful. It doesn't really tell us what the rationale of the court was, or the reasoning, how they got to that opinion, what the effect, impact of their order was. There's no dissent in that instance. So including the related federal can be helpful, but just know you're going to find federal cases most likely. And so if you do, just be aware of that and know, and you have to know, which this is a challenge at the point that you're at, but you have to know when those federal decisions are persuasive and when they are irrelevant. They don't have any effect, and that can be a challenge. So we'll save that as our search, and then we will use the same search language here, and we'll drop it in, and it will give us some cases. So on the left here, Lexis loaded long ago, and it has over 10,000 results, and that's usually what both of them will say, 10,000 results. Let me actually broaden this because I'm going to broaden, excuse me, I'm going to broaden the search language in Westlaw, because in Lexis, we searched that term or that phrase, I suppose, in secondary sources, and it gave us a ton. And I want to show you that same breadth in Westlaw, except in Westlaw, we only did Florida and federal, the related federal, which means the Florida Southern, Middle, and Northern District federal district courts, and then the 11th Circuit, and then the U.S. Supreme Court. That's what related federal means. I should have said that earlier. I apologize. So I'm going to broaden this because imagine the world of law reviews and journals and cases and statutes and legislation, all of these things is much broader than just Florida and related federal. This encapsulates law reviews and journals from every state, and Guam and Puerto Rico and potentially all over the world. So I'm just going to broaden the search in Westlaw so we have a similarly massive amount of information to choose from, and it was not as massive as I thought it would be. I thought we'd have more cases, but we do have that in the secondary sources. Anytime you see 10,000, Lexis does this plus, but anytime you see 10,000, just know it's probably more than 10,000. And they sort of just stop counting at that point to let you know, like, hey, this is way too many things. You can't read 10,000 things. It's just not in any reasonable time frame where you're doing an assignment. So we have to then narrow, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to just number one, check off the list. This is how you get to these platforms. It's how you start to use the platforms. You want to have some limiting approach to what you're searching for. And the thing to know on Westlaw is when you're looking at all content, there is a drop-down menu. Well, no, maybe it's under advanced. Okay, well, let's come back to that. So rather than working off of that search bar at the top, what you can do is you can start through the browse section here, you can start your search like we did in Lexis with, for example, we want to do secondary sources. So it's going to bring us to a new page. It's going to allow us to continue to narrow, or we can just work right off of this secondary source search bar. And so if we do that here, then it's going to get us to probably something similar. Yeah, fairly similar. Now, one thing to know is if you search the exact same terms with the exact same restrictions, like jurisdictional restrictions, in both systems, you may get a different number of results. And students frequently will say, you know, how is that possible? These are, you know, they're searching sort of the same body of information. Yeah, I mean, they are, but they're run by two different companies. Private companies, there's not a sort of a standardized methodology, and they get their information from different sources. They actually have lawyers on staff. Both of them have a lot of lawyers on staff that constantly are updating, uploading, editing, putting commentary in. A lot of these boxes that you'll see in the detail section, these are written by lawyers frequently. Lexis is a little bit different. We'll talk about that. I'm going to do another video where I go through some search sort of details and breakdown of narrowing the search. But this is largely how you use the system. One last thing, and then I'm going to end this video and I'm going to go to another to keep these sort of short and tight. I don't recommend searching in this way, where you are just typing in a string of words. I very strongly recommend using terms and connectors, and I'm going to go to that next because I think that is very helpful. And then we're going to start learning how to narrow our search by different options here, frequently on the left-hand side. So let's go to that.